Hey everybody, welcome to Readers That Write. Today we're going on a little bit of a literary journey with me that is related to a question I get asked quite frequently. And that is why I read science fiction and why people should care about it. There's a lot that goes into this, and there's a lot to science fiction that a lot of people don't realize. And it's something that I hope we can help you discover a little bit more about today. So don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that little notification bell so that you get more of these updates, and we can explore more book genres and maybe discover some new books and some new favorite authors in the meantime. So, first off, what is science fiction? Science fiction is probably one of the most broad genre names that still exists. It's something that is on par with generalizing all of fantasy under fantasy. Science fiction can span the breadth of the universe and can be something wild and epic, just like an epic fantasy is. Or it can be a very cozy story. It can also be a horror. It can be a romance, although those aren't too common right now. But the world of science fiction is something that we can really get to understand and develop ourselves through reading it. It's something that a lot of extremely successful and famous authors were very prolific in either reading or writing of science fiction. And it's something that has a very niche community and a very supportive community in it as well. So let's talk about some of the reasons why people will actually read science fiction. What are some of the reasons that you may want to read science fiction? The first one is pretty much the overarching answer that you'll get from pretty much everyone of why they think science fiction readers read science fiction. And they're not wrong. And that is exploring of the unknown. Science fiction lets us experience things that we never will be able to. And most science fiction stories have some level of exploring unknown situations or unknown people or unknown cultures and getting to deal with that unknown factor in our lives. We all have some form of the unknown that we all live through, and science fiction is a good way for us to help either deal with the unknown that we're dealing with or to learn the skills to deal with the unknown. And that's something that I've always loved. It's something that hooked me when I was very young, in the 6th grade. And it's something that is very big for a lot of science fiction readers. There's a lot that goes into it. And getting to understand the unknown and uncharted can be very deep. Sometimes you'll see it in a very broad sense in something like Star Trek, where they're literally traveling to unknown places and getting to deal with unknown people. While we don't have to deal with it on that scale most of the time, there are other unknowns and there are other stories that are fantastic. A good example of that is The Martian. He has to deal with the unknown of how can he survive to the next day. And there are others that are even just as simple as how do I deal with my new reality? And I've got a whole bookshelf behind me. Almost, I'd say over half of the books on there are science fiction. And it's something that has greatly affected me. One of the best examples of this exploring the unknown that is on a different level, it's a very personal level, is The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Exploring Medieval England. Yes, the title makes it sound like it's a historical fiction. It is not. It's about someone who goes into a pocket dimension and forgets everything. He has to discover who he is. And discovering who he is while traveling through time and space and dealing with everything from sci-fi weapons to medieval knights or to Vikings is a fascinating story. And the unknown, while some of the unknown is the unknown people and the unknown situation, the big unknown of the story is himself. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he came from. He doesn't know why he's there. And he has to deal with that and recreate himself while rediscovering himself at the same time. And that unknown factor is one of the big reasons I read it, science fiction. The next several are as well, but that is kind of the general reason that you'll hear for science fiction. The next is one that a lot of science fiction authors and deep science fiction readers will discuss. And that is science fiction's unique ability to give a social commentary without actually directly picking a side in a fight. Sci-fi allows us to deal with unique situations, things like racism or sexism or any of the big social issues that we're dealing with right now. And it allows us to frame it in a way that we can look at it without picking a fight one way or another, or accidentally crossing a line with one of the groups involved. One of the best examples of this that I can think of is actually from the Star Trek original series TV show that was in the 60s. It was in the middle of all of the racial unrest and Martin Luther King was still alive and everything that was going on at that time. And they decided to pick a social commentary on that situation, showing how strange racism looks when framed outside of the individual and outside of our current their current accepted at that time situation with some of the Jim Crow laws. And they did that by creating aliens. And this is something that has been addressed thousands of times in science fiction stories as well. But this is kind of the most famous example, or one of the most famous examples of it, where these aliens were half black and half white. Half of them were black on the left side, white on the right side, and the other half were the opposite. And it had caused hundreds of wars and strife because they hated each other just because the black was on the wrong side. And this type of social commentary isn't unusual. You find it a lot in science fiction. L. Ron Hubbard actually adds satire to this mix and does some very, very funny science fiction based commentary on the situation that he lived through. We see this with one of my personal favorites, Craig Allenson. He does this as well, but he hides this a little bit more than some of the other ones. L. Ron Hubbard is pretty blatant with his commentary, whereas a lot of other social commentary is hidden and layered throughout. And it's fantastic to read because you can learn to understand and learn empathy for all of these situations without actually having to be forced through them. And it can often prepare younger people with how to deal with them as well. Putting the social commentary in these books allows people to understand that it's okay to accept other people. Even Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game, which is huge for me, throughout that entire series, he discovers why these aliens are fighting them and actually goes through to save some of these aliens in order to preserve them while also stopping them from hurting his friends. And the lessons these teach and the social commentary that it gives is something that is super important to us as a society. And it's something that a lot of other genres can't do because either they're stuck in the past and have to deal with antiquated ways of doing things, whether that be historical fiction or in a lot of cases fantasy. Although modern fantasy has found ways around this by taking world building to another level, a lot of these social commentaries and speculative fiction elements are a little bit more difficult in the fantastical. But there's even more that comes from science fiction, and that's innovation and imagination. Innovation and imagination are massive. If you talk to a lot of the major tech moguls, they will tell you that they were influenced by some form of science fiction, whether it be the old flip communicators that actually inspired cell phones from Star Trek, or certain types of space travel that came from Star Wars or Ender's Game or any of the vast majority of science fiction, going all the way back to War of the Worlds and things like that, that inspired a lot of the scientists and astronauts that pushed to the stars in the first place. It's one of the major goals of science fiction authors and science fiction luminaries that they want to help influence and innovate the world. If we can present as science fiction authors something that is plausible and inspire someone to create, we did our job. But beyond just that, presenting concepts and potential realities is something that we can do. We can create and learn from all of these social constructs, or one of the big ones that's become a thing lately through a lot of the early 2000 science fiction books is green construction. And we're seeing this in some of the newer, more modern cities where they're intentionally building plants and plant life into larger skyscrapers, allowing plants to flow and grow off of balconies, and designing ways to take care of them is a very sustainable way of both growing food and just increasing the beauty of modern construction. And it's been fascinating to see some of these buildings go up. Before I went into technology myself, I actually wanted to study architecture. So I'm always fascinated to see all of these new innovations and to see that the genre that's currently referred to as solar punk is inspiring a lot of these. I don't know if that name will stick long term, but that is the name that's kind of being used as an industry right now. And beyond all of these cool things, there's simple reasons to pick up a science fiction book. And that is, these are some massively character-driven stories. So if you're a fan of an author like Brandon Sanderson or Neil Gaiman or Tolkien or Rebecca Yarros, they're all very character-driven authors. They love to present a character and display them in a way that you get to know them almost better than they know themselves by the end of the book. And that's something that's been a staple of fantasy for a long time, but it's also a staple of science fiction. It doesn't matter how far you go back, science fiction has almost always been character driven. And that's something that is pretty unique to itself. Fantasy isn't always character driven. Some genres are, but typically you have to find the author that you want to be character driven. Whereas with science fiction, 90 to 95% of the time, you will pick up a character driven story. Very, very infrequently is it not character driven. Sometimes it'll be driven by multiple characters, like in Star Wars, but the character is a foundation. Because in science fiction, the character is how we can understand and connect to the reality they've created. So, if you're a fan of character-driven stories, science fiction is for you. There is absolutely zero reason why you wouldn't enjoy the characters of these stories. The next is kind of connected to some of the other ones we've talked about, but is something that is very exciting for a lot of people when they're reading science fiction, and that's a sense of wonder and adventure. In science fiction, it takes place beyond our current time frame, whether that be 10 years from now, or 10,000 years from now, or in the case of Warhammer 40k, 38,000 years from now, and Dune about the same. There's a lot of wonder and adventure that can be had in these universes. We get to explore. We get to do things that we as humans in this era probably will never do. We're not going to be... There are very few human beings in our time that will be setting foot on other celestial bodies. That's just kind of the unfortunate reality of the situation. But through science fiction, we can do that. We can explore a world that has purple plants. We can explore worlds like James Cameron's Avatar. We can explore worlds that frankly want to kill us, is mostly the case in Warhammer. Or we can explore worlds that are very unique and have things that aren't possible here on Earth, but are things that we can enjoy. And they're things that can spark our imagination and help us grow and learn. And kind of tying back into the social commentary, diversity and representation is something that we can fit into science fiction because we're not constrained by the past. A lot of fantasy struggles with this, as do things like historical fiction, because depending on the group you're creating, in the past, there wasn't a lot of diversity in certain parts of the world. That wasn't because people actively avoided it. It's just people didn't travel. People were stuck within their 30 to max 200 miles, typically throughout their entire life. So it's hard to have diversity when you're stuck with the same people forever. And that is a constraint that people in those genres have to deal with. Having written in both, it is extremely hard. I had to figure out an excuse to explain why there was diversity in my story through them being refugees that had to flee oppression from different parts of the world. And that's how the diverse groups ended up where they did. Because historically, when only the rich had horses, and horses were the only way to get really between towns, even knowing people from a different town was diversity. In science fiction, that is not the problem. We have starships. Diversity in a lot of science fiction is how many different types of aliens can I meet? And how many different types of aliens do I have on my crew? It's not how many people of different accents and colors can I fit in. And the reality is, in science fiction, diversity is actually one of the driving factors. A science fiction author can tell a diverse story very easily in science fiction. So if that's something you look for and that's something you strive for, go for it. Having female captains in starships, completely doable. Wasn't even hard for me to write my female protagonist, who ends up being a captain of a starship, because 500 years in the future, that's not even a weird thing to think about. We have it now. Oh, somewhat. Women are just starting to get into military command now. But 500 years in the future, as long as there's some semblance of the same value system we have, not even hard to imagine. 500 years in the past, that is an entirely different conversation. Most ships didn't let women on because they thought it was bad luck. So even getting on a ship to go across the ocean was hard for women, let alone commanding their own ship. Now, that being said, there were actually a couple. They were all pirates, and they were all very rogue and hunted until they were killed. But that doesn't have to be the case in the future. Whatever group you want represented is very easy to represent in the future. Because you can. There's no, as a culture, we're not getting less diverse. We're getting more diverse. And the final reason to read science fiction, and it's probably my big reason to read science fiction, is escapism. Science fiction, while still being something somewhat similar to what you're used to, is not your current life. I can go and run away to the galaxy a long time ago, we can run away to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I can run to the grimdark future of the 41st millennium. I can run to Mars in several different books. I can run to different academies and learn with Ender. I can go to a pocket dimension in medieval England. It doesn't matter. I can escape from all of the stress and the chaos of my current life to go on an adventure. That's actually my favorite part of writing science fiction, because I can do the same thing, but I get to create the world while I'm doing it. And that level of escapism is fantastic. It's why readers read. And in science fiction, you can take it even further. There's more ability to have escapism. And just like we talked about, the diverse nature of science fiction allows for broader escapism. So, I hope I've convinced you to read science fiction if you haven't already. And if you have, tell me some of your favorite things. And if I didn't cover something that you love with science fiction, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. All of that goes a long way to help me out, so I can keep making videos like this for you guys and get stories coming for all of those who enjoyed those stories as well.